At 91 years old, Margaret Harper should have been surrounded by the warmth of her family, basking in the love and memories of a life well lived. But as the sun set on her birthday, her once vibrant home was eerily silent, echoing with the absence of those she held most dear. The cake sat untouched, the phone remained silent. No calls, no visitors. Alone in a house filled with the shadows of happier times, Margaret couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Why had the people she sacrificed everything for chosen to forget her on the day she needed them most? But what no one knew was that Margaret had a plan that would shake her family to its core. A plan that would reveal truths they never imagined and force them to confront a past they had long buried. The moment her children and grandchildren laid eyes on her will, everything they thought they knew about her and themselves would change forever. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, its somber tone echoing through the empty rooms of the once bustling Harper mansion. Margaret Harper, a frail woman of 91 years, sat alone in her favorite armchair, her gnarled hands clasped tightly in her lap. The soft glow of a single table lamp cast long shadows across the faded Victorian wallpaper, highlighting the absence of the family portraits that once adorned the walls. As the last chime faded, Margaret's eyes, still sharp despite her age, darted to the silent phone on the side table. No calls, no messages, no one remembered. A lump formed in her throat as she recalled birthdays past, the house filled with laughter, the pitter-patter of little feet racing down creaky wooden stairs, the warmth of embraces from children and grandchildren alike. But today, on what could very well be her last birthday, Margaret Harper sat in deafening silence. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her 9 decades, Margaret slowly pushed herself up from the chair. Her joints protested, a chorus of pops and creaks accompanying her careful journey to the dining room. There, on the polished mahogany table that had hosted countless family gatherings, sat a solitary cupcake with a single unlit candle. Margaret's hand trembled as she struck a match, the small flame dancing in her watery eyes. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered, her voice cracking. She closed her eyes, made a wish she knew would never come true, and blew out the candle. The wisp of smoke curled upward, disappearing into the shadows of the high ceiling, much like her hopes of reconciliation with her estranged family. As she turned away from the table, a sharp pain lanced through her chest. Margaret clutched at her heart, gasping. Was this it? Would she die here, alone and forgotten? The moment passed, leaving her shaken but alive. It was a stark reminder of her mortality, and of all the things left unsaid. With renewed purpose, Margaret shuffled to the old cherry wood secretary in the corner of the living room. The key to its locked drawer hung on a delicate chain around her neck, hidden beneath her cardigan. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the drawer and pulled out a worn wooden box. Inside lay the remnants of a life lived fully, if not always wisely. Faded photographs, yellowed letters, and legal documents told the story of Margaret Harper, a story of triumphs and failures, of love and loss, of secrets kept for far too long. Among these mementos was her last will and testament, a document that held the power to change everything. Margaret's eyes lingered on a black and white photograph of a young couple, their faces alight with hope and promise. How different things had turned out from what they had dreamed. She set the photo aside and pulled out a crisp sheet of stationery and a fountain pen, a relic from a bygone era, much like herself. The grandfather clock struck 10 as Margaret began to write. Her hand, steadier now with determination, moved across the paper. Words flowed from her pen, carrying with them the weight of decades of regret, love, and a truth that had been buried for far too long. "My dearest children," she began, tears splashing onto the paper, smudging the ink. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. There is so much I need to tell you, so many things I should have said years ago." Hours passed as Margaret poured her heart onto the pages. The house creaked and settled around her, as if listening to the secrets she was finally ready to share. When she finished, the eastern sky had begun to lighten, the first hints of dawn peeking through the heavy curtains. Margaret carefully folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, which she placed atop her will. Her task complete, exhaustion washed over her. She made her way back to her armchair, easing herself down with a groan. As she sat there, letter in hand, the weight of her decisions, past and present, pressed down on her. "If only they knew," she murmured, her voice barely audible in the quiet house. "If only they could understand." The sun rose on a new day, its warm light slowly filling the room. It illuminated Margaret's face, etched with lines of worry and sorrow, but also a glimmer of peace. She had done what needed to be done. Now all that was left was to wait. As the house came alive with the sounds of a new day, Margaret closed her eyes, the letter clutched to her chest. The ticking of the grandfather clock marked the passing of time, each second bringing her closer to the moment when her family would learn the truth. A truth that would shatter their understanding of the past and irrevocably alter their future. What secrets had Margaret harbored all these years? What truths lay hidden in that carefully penned letter? And how would her revelations impact the lives of those who had abandoned her on this, perhaps her final birthday? As the chapter draws to a close, we're left to ponder the complexities of family, the weight of unspoken words, and the power of truth to heal or destroy. What sacrifices had Margaret made for her family? What events had led to this moment of solitude on her 91st birthday? And most importantly, would her final act bring reconciliation or drive an even deeper wedge between the generations of Harpers? In the silence of the grand old house, Margaret Harper waited, her heart heavy with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that go unseen and unappreciated. As she drifted off to sleep, one question lingered in the air. When the truth finally came to light, would it be too late for forgiveness? The warm glow of a summer afternoon in 1950s Philadelphia filtered through the windows of a bustling diner. Margaret Harper, then a vibrant 20-year-old with chestnut hair and sparkling green eyes, balanced a tray of milkshakes with practiced ease. Her laughter rang out above the clinking of glasses and the jukebox playing Elvis Presley's latest hit. "Order up for table 7, Maggie," called out Joe, the gruff but kindly short-order cook. As Margaret weaved her way through the crowded diner, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished chrome of the soda fountain. For a moment, her smile faltered. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. Born into one of Philadelphia's most prominent families, Margaret had once been destined for debutante balls and Ivy League education. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The bell above the diner door chimed, and in walked Thomas Harper, his army uniform crisp and his smile dazzling. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Their eyes met across the room, and suddenly, the noise of the diner faded away. This was the moment that would change everything. Flash forward to 1960. Margaret stood in the opulent foyer of her family's mainline mansion, her hands shaking as she clutched a piece of paper that felt as heavy as lead. The ink was barely dry on the document that would disinherit her punishment for marrying Thomas against her father's wishes. "You'll regret this, Margaret," her father's voice boomed, echoing off the marble floors. "That boy will never be able to provide for you the way we have. You're throwing away everything for a foolish infatuation." Tears streamed down Margaret's face, but her voice was steady when she replied, "You're wrong, Father. Thomas and I love each other. We'll make our own way." As the massive oak door slammed behind her, Margaret felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had chosen love over wealth, passion over security. Little did she know the true cost of that decision. The scene shifted to a modest apartment in 1965. Margaret, now a mother of 2 young children, sat at the kitchen table, poring over bills by the light of a single lamp. Thomas had been laid off from the steel mill, and their savings were dwindling rapidly. The sound of her children's laughter from the next room was both a comfort and a source of anxiety. How would they provide for them? A knock at the door startled Margaret from her worries. She opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, handing her the package. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the letter. Her eyes widened as she read its contents. Her estranged mother had passed away, leaving Margaret a small inheritance, against her father's wishes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a fresh start. But as Margaret's eyes fell on the final paragraph, her blood ran cold. The inheritance came with a condition, one that would haunt her for decades to come. The narrative jumped to 1975. Margaret stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her hat and gloves. She looked every inch the successful businesswoman she had become. Through shrewd investments and tireless work, she had rebuilt a fortune that rivaled her family's. But success had come at a price. Thomas was gone, driven away by Margaret's relentless pursuit of financial security. Her children, now teenagers, were distant and resentful of a mother who seemed more concerned with board meetings than ballet recitals. As Margaret prepared to leave for yet another business trip, her daughter Sarah appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Why do you even bother coming home anymore?" she spat. "It's not like you care about us." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She wanted to explain, to tell Sarah about the sacrifice she was making, about the secret that drove her. But the words caught in her throat. How could she explain a choice made so long ago, a burden she had carried alone for so many years? Instead, she simply said, "I'm doing this for you, for all of us. Someday you'll understand." Sarah's bitter laugh echoed in Margaret's ears as she closed the front door behind her. The weight of her secret pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than ever. The final scene unfolded in 1990. Margaret sat alone in her study, surrounded by the trappings of wealth she had worked so hard to acquire. A letter lay open on her desk, an invitation to her granddaughter's wedding. She hadn't even known Emma was engaged. Tears fell silently as Margaret realized the true cost of her choices. She had rebuilt her fortune, yes, but at what price? Her family was scattered, her relationships in tatters. The condition of her inheritance, the secret she had kept for so long, suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of all she had lost. With shaking hands, Margaret reached for a pen and paper. It was time to make things right, to reveal the truth she had hidden for decades. But as she began to write, doubt crept in. Would the truth heal the wounds of the past, or would it only drive her family further away? As the chapter draws to a close, we're left to ponder the nature of sacrifice and the weight of secrets. What was the mysterious condition attached to Margaret's inheritance? How had it shaped the course of her life and the lives of her children and grandchildren? And most importantly, would the truth, long concealed, bring redemption or destruction? In the silence of her grand house, Margaret Harper faced the consequences of a life lived in pursuit of a promise made long ago. As she put pen to paper, one question hung in the air. Is it ever too late to right the wrongs of the past, or are some mistakes too big to be forgiven? The soft glow of dawn crept through the curtains of Margaret Harper's bedroom, casting long shadows across the antique four-poster bed. At 91, Margaret's nights were often restless, filled with memories and regrets that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. This morning, as she slowly opened her eyes, the weight of her past pressed down on her chest like a physical presence. She turned her head, her gaze falling on the empty pillow beside her. Thomas had been gone for over 3 decades now, but some mornings, in those hazy moments between sleep and wakefulness, she could almost feel the warmth of his body next to hers. The ache of his absence had never truly faded. With a soft groan, Margaret pushed herself up, her joints protesting the movement. She reached for the gilded frame on her nightstand, a family portrait taken on her 60th birthday. It was the last time they had all been together, smiling for the camera as if everything was perfect. If only they had known then how things would unravel. As she traced the faces of her children and grandchildren with a trembling finger, memories flooded back, each one tinged with the bitterness of guilt. She remembered Sarah's high school graduation. Margaret had promised to be there, had even bought a new dress for the occasion. But at the last minute, a crucial business deal had come up, one that could secure the financial future she had been working towards for so long. She had sent her assistant with flowers and a note of apology. The look of disappointment on Sarah's face in the graduation photos still haunted her. Then there was Michael's wedding. She had attended, of course, propriety demanded it. But she had been distracted, her mind on the mountain of paperwork waiting for her back at the office. She had left early, missing the father-daughter dance and the cutting of the cake. Michael had never quite forgiven her for that. And Emma, dear sweet Emma, her granddaughter had tried so hard to bridge the gap, to understand the grandmother who always seemed just out of reach. Margaret remembered the day Emma had come to her, eyes shining with excitement, to share news of her acceptance to medical school. Instead of celebrating, Margaret had launched into a lecture about the importance of financial security and the instability of the healthcare system. The light in Emma's eyes had dimmed, and another wall had gone up between them. Margaret's hand clenched around the frame, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. How many moments had she missed? How many opportunities for connection had she let slip away, all in service of a secret she had kept buried for decades? She set the photo down and slowly made her way to the window, pushing aside the heavy drapes. The sprawling grounds of her estate stretched out before her, meticulously manicured and utterly empty. What good was all this wealth if there was no one to share it with? The guilt that had been her constant companion for so long surged up, threatening to overwhelm her. She had told herself that every sacrifice was necessary, that one day her family would understand why she had done the things she'd done. But standing here now, alone in this grand house, the justifications rang hollow. Margaret's eyes fell on the old cherry-wood secretary in the corner of her bedroom. Inside that locked drawer lay the truth, the whole truth, that she had never had the courage to share. The secret that had driven her relentless pursuit of wealth, the burden that had shaped every decision she had made for the past 60 years. With slow, deliberate steps, Margaret made her way to the secretary. Her hand trembled as she reached for the key that hung around her neck. For decades, she had been on the verge of revealing everything, of unburdening herself to her family. But each time, fear had held her back. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear that the truth would only drive them further away. As she turned the key in the lock, Margaret was hit by a wave of memories. The look of betrayal on Thomas's face when she chose a business meeting over their anniversary dinner. The sound of Sarah's voice, cold and distant, as she told Margaret not to bother coming to her son's christening. The silence on the other end of the phone when she called Michael on his birthday, only to realize she was a day late. The tear-stained letter from Emma, explaining why she wouldn't be coming home for Christmas anymore. Each memory was a dagger to her heart, a stark reminder of the true cost of the secret she had kept for so long. Margaret's fingers closed around the stack of papers inside the drawer, legal documents, old letters, and a sealed envelope addressed to her children. This was it, the explanation for everything, the truth that could potentially heal the rifts in her family, or shatter what little connection remained. As she held the envelope, a lifetime of what-ifs cascaded through her mind. What if she had told them the truth years ago? What if she had chosen family over fortune? What if she had found the courage to break free from the burden of her secret? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, startling Margaret from her reverie. It was time for her to face the consequences of her choices, to take the first step towards redemption or final condemnation. With a deep breath, Margaret reached for a pen. It was time to write one last letter, to make one last attempt to explain the unexplainable. As she put pen to paper, tears blurred her vision, but her hand remained steady. "My dearest children," she began, "there is so much I need to tell you." As the chapter draws to a close, we're left to contemplate the corrosive power of guilt and the weight of unspoken truths. What terrible secret could have driven Margaret to sacrifice so much? Can a lifetime of absence and neglect ever truly be explained or forgiven? And as Margaret finally prepares to unburden herself, we're forced to ask, is it ever too late to make amends, or are some bridges, once burned, forever lost? In the quiet of her room, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had cost her everything that truly mattered, Margaret Harper faced the reckoning she had avoided for so long. As she poured her heart onto the page, one question hung in the air. When the truth finally comes to light, will it bring healing or only more pain to a family already fractured by decades of misunderstanding and resentment? The soft whir of the air conditioning was the only sound in Margaret Harper's cavernous bedroom as she sealed the last envelope with trembling hands. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the manicured lawns of her estate, but Margaret hadn't slept a wink. Her night had been spent pouring her heart onto paper, crafting final messages for each of her children and grandchildren. She placed the stack of letters on her nightstand, next to a framed photo of her family from happier times. Her gaze lingered on the smiling faces, so full of hope and love. How had they drifted so far apart? With a heavy sigh, Margaret pushed herself up from her writing desk. Her bones creaked in protest, a stark reminder of her 91 years. She shuffled to her closet, determination etched into every line of her face. Today was the day she would prepare for her final goodbye. As she opened the closet door, her eyes fell on the rows of designer clothes, each item a silent testament to her wealth. But today, she reached past the silk and cashmere, her fingers finding a simple black dress she hadn't worn in years. It was the dress she had worn to Thomas's funeral, and it seemed fitting for the task ahead. Carefully, she laid the dress on her bed and began the meticulous process of preparing her home and herself for her departure. Room by room, Margaret moved through the mansion, her once sharp mind recalling every detail that needed attention. In the kitchen, she disposed of perishables and left a note for her housekeeper, thanking her for years of loyal service. In the study, she organized important documents, placing them in clearly labeled folders. As she worked, memories flooded back, each room holding echoes of the past. In the formal dining room, she paused by the grand table where family dinners had once been a nightly ritual. She could almost hear the clinking of silverware, the laughter of her children, the warmth of togetherness that had slowly faded away. Her hand traced the polished wood, remembering the last time they had all gathered here, her 80th birthday. The stilted conversations and tense silences of that night had been a far cry from the joyous celebrations of years past. In the living room, her eyes fell on the piano in the corner. Sarah had been so talented, her small fingers dancing over the keys with a grace that had brought tears to Margaret's eyes. But Margaret had missed too many recitals, too caught up in board meetings and business deals. The piano stood silent now, a layer of dust testament to years of neglect. As she reached Michael's old room, Margaret's hand hesitated on the doorknob. She hadn't entered this space in years, too painful a reminder of her failings as a mother. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open. The room was frozen in time, trophies still lined the shelves. Posters of long-retired athletes adorned the walls. On the dresser, a framed photo caught her eye. Michael at his college graduation, his smile strained as he stood stiffly beside her. She hadn't noticed his discomfort then, too preoccupied with her phone buzzing with important emails. Now, the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. Each step through the house was a journey through her regrets. Every room a reminder of moments lost and connections severed. But as painful as it was, Margaret pressed on. She was determined to leave everything in perfect order. By late afternoon, the house was immaculate. Every surface gleamed, every belonging carefully arranged. Margaret stood in the foyer, looking around at the fruits of her life's work. The antique vases, the priceless paintings, the crystal chandeliers, all of it seemed so hollow now. With a heavy heart, she made her way back to her bedroom. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room as Margaret slowly dressed in the black garment. She applied a touch of lipstick, her one concession to vanity, and settled into her favorite armchair by the window. On the table beside her, she placed the stack of letters, her will, and a final note explaining her actions. Her gnarled hands smoothed down the papers, a lifetime of secrets and explanations contained in those pages. As twilight deepened into night, Margaret sat still, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky. In her mind, she saw her life play out like a film, the triumphs and failures, the love and loss, the choices that had led her to this moment of solitary reflection. She thought of Sarah, her firstborn, with her fierce intelligence and wounded heart, of Michael, so much like his father, whose attempts to connect she had rebuffed time and time again, of Emma, her sweet granddaughter, whose warmth she had never allowed herself to fully embrace. Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks as the weight of her decisions pressed down upon her. She had spent a lifetime building a fortune, believing it would secure her family's future. But in doing so, she had lost the very thing she had sought to protect, the love and connection of those dearest to her. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, Margaret closed her eyes. Her last thoughts were of hope that her final letters would bring understanding, if not forgiveness. Hope that the truth, long concealed, would heal the wounds she had inflicted. In the silence of the grand old house, Margaret Harper took her last breath, her secrets finally at rest. The chapter closes, leaving us to ponder the profound loneliness of Margaret's final hours. What truths did those carefully penned letters contain? Would her children and grandchildren find it in their hearts to understand and forgive? Or would Margaret's legacy be one of wealth and possessions, devoid of the love and connection she had sacrificed so much to protect? As dawn breaks on a new day, the Harper mansion stands silent, its rooms filled with valuable objects but empty of life and laughter. We're left to wonder, in the end, what is the true measure of a life well lived? Is it the fortune amassed, or the love shared? And can the revelations contained in Margaret's final messages bridge the chasm created by decades of misunderstanding and absence? In the quiet of the morning, as the world awakens unaware of the passing of Margaret Harper, one question lingers in the air. When her family finally reads her last words, will they find closure, or will they be left with even more unanswered questions about the woman they thought they knew? The morning sun cast long shadows across the immaculately manicured lawn of the Harper estate as a sleek black sedan pulled up the winding driveway. Sarah Harper Reynolds, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped out of the car, her Louboutin heels clicking against the pavement. Her brother Michael emerged from the passenger side, tugging uncomfortably at his tie. "I still can't believe she's gone," Michael muttered, his voice thick with emotion he was trying hard to suppress. Sarah's lips thinned. "Well, it's not like she was ever really here, was she?" The bitterness in her tone was palpable. As they approached the imposing front door, it swung open to reveal Emma, Sarah's daughter. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual vivacity dimmed by grief. "Mom, Uncle Mike," she said softly, embracing them both. "I'm so glad you're here." The trio made their way into the cavernous foyer, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the emotional storm brewing within its walls. "Mr. Goldstein is waiting in the study," Emma informed them, referring to the family's longtime lawyer. He says Grandma left some things we need to see." Sarah's eyebrow arched. "What things? I thought everything was settled years ago." They found Mr. Goldstein, a man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, seated behind the massive oak desk in the study. The room smelled of leather and old books, a scent that brought a flood of childhood memories rushing back to Michael and Sarah. "Please sit down," Mr. Goldstein said, gesturing to the chairs arranged before the desk. As they settled in, he pulled out a thick envelope. "Before we begin, I want you to know that your mother loved you very much. She wanted me to tell you that." Sarah scoffed softly, but Michael leaned forward, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Margaret Eleanor Harper, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath." As the lawyer's voice droned on, detailing the distribution of Margaret's considerable estate, the siblings exchanged glances. It was all as expected, the house to be sold, the proceeds split between them, various charities receiving substantial donations. But then Mr. Goldstein's voice faltered. There's something else," he said, pulling out another envelope. "Your mother left this for you. She instructed me to give it to you after the will was read." With trembling hands, he passed the envelope to Sarah. She stared at it for a long moment, her mother's elegant handwriting stark against the cream paper. Finally, she tore it open. As Sarah began to read aloud, her voice grew increasingly unsteady. "My dearest children, By the time you read this, I will be gone. There is so much I need to tell you, so many things I should have said years ago. The truth is, I have carried a secret for most of my life. A secret that shaped every decision I ever made, every sacrifice I thought I had to make. When I was disinherited for marrying your father, I thought we could make it on love alone. But when he lost his job and you children were so young, I was desperate. That's when I received word that my mother had left me a small inheritance. But there was a condition attached to it, one that has haunted me for decades. Sarah's voice trailed off, her hand shaking so badly she could no longer read. Michael gently took the letter from her and continued. The money came with a stipulation. I was to rebuild the Harper fortune to its former glory, or everything would revert to a distant cousin. If I failed, you, my beloved children, would be left with nothing. I became obsessed with this goal, convinced that securing your financial future was the most important thing I could do as a mother. In my misguided attempts to protect you, I lost sight of what truly mattered: your love, your presence in my life. Every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every cold response to your attempts to connect. They were all because I was terrified of failing you in the way I thought mattered most. I realize now, far too late, that in trying to secure your future, I sacrificed our present. I chose wealth over warmth, success over love. And for that, I can never forgive myself. I don't expect your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I hope that in understanding the burden I carried, you might find some peace. The fortune I've rebuilt is yours now, to do with as you see fit. But my final wish is this: don't let it control you as it controlled me. Live your lives with love, with joy, with the connections I was too afraid to nurture. I love you more than you will ever know. I'm sorry I never found the courage to show you. Always, Mom. As Michael's voice faded, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emma was openly weeping, while Sarah sat rigidly, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Michael's hands shook as he set down the letter. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat softly. "There's more," he said, his voice gentle. "Your mother left individual letters for each of you, and a series of video recordings she made in her final days." The siblings stared at the stack of envelopes and the flash drive the lawyer placed on the desk. Each bore a name: Sarah, Michael, Emma, and the other grandchildren. As the chapter closes, we're left to grapple with the shocking revelation of Margaret's secret burden. How will this knowledge change the way her children and grandchildren view her life and choices? Can understanding breed forgiveness? Or is the damage of decades of emotional distance too great to repair? The Harper family stands at a crossroads, the truth they've longed for finally within reach. But as they face the prospect of delving deeper into Margaret's hidden past, one question looms large. Will the full story of Margaret Harper bring healing to this fractured family, or will it only deepen the wounds of a lifetime of misunderstanding? The study of the Harper mansion, once a sanctuary of power and prestige, now felt suffocating. Sarah, Michael, and Emma sat in stunned silence, the weight of Margaret's revelation pressing down on them like a physical force. Mr. Goldstein had quietly excused himself, leaving the family to process the shocking truth in private. Sarah was the first to move, reaching with trembling hands for the envelope bearing her name. She hesitated for a moment, then tore it open, her eyes scanning the contents. As she read, her composed facade crumbled, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. Michael, his own letter clutched tightly in his fist, watched his usually stoic sister with a mix of concern and apprehension. "Sarah?" he asked gently. Sarah looked up, her eyes shimmering with a cocktail of emotions: grief, anger, and a glimmer of something that might have been understanding. She explains everything, Mike. The missed recitals, the forgotten birthdays. God, do you remember when she didn't show up for my high school graduation? Michael nodded, the memory still painful after all these years. Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She was closing a deal that day, a deal that put us over the threshold she needed to secure our inheritance. She thought she was protecting us. Emma, who had been silently reading her own letter, let out a choked sob. She writes here about my medical school graduation. She says she was so proud, but so terrified that I was choosing a path that might leave me financially vulnerable. That's why she lectured me about the instability of the healthcare system instead of congratulating me. The room fell silent again as they each retreated into their own memories, re-examining a lifetime of interactions through this new lens. Michael finally opened his letter, his hands shaking slightly. As he read, his expression shifted from hurt to confusion to a profound sadness. "She apologizes for missing my wedding reception," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Says she was on a call with Tokyo, finalizing an acquisition that would double the company's value overnight. She thought she was securing our future, but all I wanted was for her to be there to see me dance with Elaine." The siblings exchanged glances, decades of resentment and misunderstanding beginning to crumble in the face of their mother's desperate attempts to protect them. Emma, always the peacemaker, reached for the flash drive Mr. Goldstein had left. Should we watch them?" she asked hesitantly. Sarah and Michael nodded, and Emma inserted the drive into the computer on the desk. The screen flickered to life, revealing Margaret's face. She looked tired, older than they remembered, but her eyes burned with an intensity that took them aback. "My darlings," Margaret's voice filled the room, slightly raspy but firm. "If you're watching this, then you've read my letters. I know that words on paper can never fully express the depth of my regret, my love, or my reasons. So I wanted to speak to you, one last time, face to face." As the video played, Margaret poured out her heart. She recounted memories from their childhood, moments of joy that she had cherished even as she pushed herself further into her work. She spoke of her own parents, the pressure she had felt to live up to the Harper name, and the crushing weight of the secret she had carried for so long. "Sarah," Margaret said, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, "I was there, at your graduation. I stood at the back of the auditorium, bursting with pride as you gave your valedictorian speech. I wanted so badly to run to you, to tell you how amazing you were. But I had to leave for that meeting, and I convinced myself that securing your future was more important than celebrating your present. I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Sarah gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. All these years, she had thought her mother simply hadn't cared enough to show up. Margaret continued, addressing each of them in turn. To Michael, she spoke of his kindness, how much he reminded her of his father. She confessed to pulling away from him emotionally because the pain of missing Thomas was sometimes too much to bear. To Emma and her other grandchildren, Margaret's voice softened with a tenderness they had rarely seen. "I kept my distance because I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that if I allowed myself to love you as fiercely as I wanted to, I would lose sight of my goal. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself from the pain of potential failure." As the video neared its end, Margaret's composure finally broke. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," she said, tears flowing freely now. "But I hope that in understanding why I made the choices I did, you might find some peace. The fortune I've rebuilt is yours now, but please don't let it control you as it controlled me. Live your lives with love, with joy, with the connections I was too afraid to nurture." The screen went dark, leaving the study in silence once more. Sarah, Michael, and Emma sat motionless, each lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the revelations that had shaken the very foundation of their understanding of their mother and their family history. As the chapter draws to a close, we're left to ponder the transformative power of truth and the complexity of familial love. Can Margaret's posthumous confessions bridge the chasm created by decades of misunderstanding? Will her children and grandchildren find it in their hearts to forgive her, now that they understand the burden she carried? The Harper family sits at a crossroads, the truth they've longed for finally laid bare. But as they begin to process Margaret's revelations, new questions arise. How will this knowledge change their relationships with each other? Can they break free from the cycle of prioritizing wealth over connection that has defined their family for generations? And perhaps most importantly, is it ever too late to heal the wounds of the past and forge a new path forward? In the quiet of the study, surrounded by the trappings of the fortune that had cost them so much, the Harpers faced their greatest challenge yet. Reconciling the mother they thought they knew with the woman Margaret truly was, and deciding what their family legacy will be in the wake of these earth-shattering revelations. The days following the reading of Margaret's will and the revelation of her long-held secret passed in a blur for the Harper family. The grand mansion, once a symbol of their mother's distant success, now felt like a mausoleum of missed opportunities and misunderstood intentions. Sarah, Michael, and Emma had barely left the estate, each grappling with the weight of Margaret's confessions in their own way. They moved through the rooms like ghosts, rediscovering their childhood home through new eyes, each artifact and photograph now imbued with a bittersweet poignancy. On a crisp autumn morning, a week after the funeral, the family gathered in the sunroom. The space was bathed in golden light, the gardens beyond the windows ablaze with fall colors. It was here that Mr. Goldstein had asked to meet them one final time. As they waited, Michael absently fingered a small box he'd found in his mother's study. "I can't believe she kept this," he murmured, opening it to reveal a collection of ticket stubs, every little league game, school play, and concert she had missed over the years, each one carefully preserved, a silent testament to the moments she had sacrificed. Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since viewing Margaret's videos, spoke up. "I found something too," she said softly, pulling out a worn leather journal. "It's her diary. I've been reading it." Her voice caught. "She wrote about us every day, you know? Every milestone, every achievement. She may not have been there, but she knew. She cared." Emma, always the most empathetic of the group, reached out to squeeze her mother's hand. "I've been going through Grandma's charitable contributions," she said. "Did you know she anonymously funded scholarships for underprivileged kids? Dozens of them every year. She wanted to give others the opportunities she felt she'd taken from us." The room fell silent as they absorbed this new information, the complex tapestry of Margaret Harper's life becoming ever more intricate. The moment was interrupted by Mr. Goldstein's arrival. The elderly lawyer looked tired but determined as he took a seat among them. "Thank you for meeting with me one last time," he began, his voice gentle. "There's something else your mother wanted you to know." He pulled out a thick folder. "This contains the details of every charitable donation and anonymous gift Margaret made over the years." As he began to outline the extent of Margaret's philanthropy, the siblings listened in stunned silence. Homeless shelters funded, medical research sponsored, disaster relief provided, the list seemed endless. "But why keep this a secret?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. Mr. Goldstein smiled sadly. Margaret believed that if her charitable works became public, it might jeopardize her ability to meet the conditions of her inheritance. She was, perhaps, overly cautious, but she also believed that true charity should be done without expectation of recognition. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "All this time we thought she was just cold, obsessed with money, but she was trying to help people, wasn't she? In her own way." The lawyer nodded. "Your mother was a complex woman, driven by fear but also by a deep sense of responsibility. She wanted to secure your future, yes, but she also felt a duty to use her wealth to make a difference in the world." As the full scope of Margaret's secret life of philanthropy unfolded before them, the Harpers found themselves reevaluating everything they thought they knew about their mother. Emma, her eyes shining with unshed tears, was the first to break the silence that followed Mr. Goldstein's revelations. I think I understand her better now," she said softly. "She was trying to balance so much, our future, her promise to her mother, her desire to help others. She didn't know how to do it all without sacrificing something." Michael nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I always wondered why she pushed me so hard to get involved in the company's charitable foundation. I thought it was just good PR. But now," he trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. Sarah, who had been flipping through the folder of charitable works, looked up suddenly. "There's something else here," she said, pulling out a sealed envelope. With trembling hands, she opened it and began to read aloud. "My dear ones, If you're reading this, then you know the full extent of what I've tried to accomplish with the fortune I rebuilt. I know it doesn't make up for the time we lost, for the moments I missed. But I hope you can see that in my misguided way, I was trying to create a legacy that would benefit not just our family, but the world at large. I've made arrangements for the Harper Foundation to continue its work long after I'm gone. But the true legacy I leave behind is you, my children and grandchildren. You are kind, compassionate, and far wiser than I ever was. I trust you to take what I've built and use it to make the world a little bit better, in whatever way you see fit. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Live with open hearts, forgive freely, and never let fear keep you from embracing the joy of the present moment. I love you always and forever. Mom. As Sarah's voice faded, the room fell into a reverent silence. The weight of Margaret's final message settled over them, a bittersweet mix of regret for what was lost and hope for what could still be. Emma was the first to speak, her voice thick with emotion. I think Grandma would want us to forgive her. And maybe it's time we forgave ourselves too, for all the years we spent angry and hurt. Michael nodded, reaching out to clasp his niece's hand. You're right, Em. Mom made mistakes, big ones, but she was trying, in her own way, to do something good. Maybe it's up to us now to carry that forward, to do better. Sarah, who had been quiet, finally looked up from the letter, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You know, for years I've been so focused on my career, on building my own fortune. I thought that's what Mom would have wanted. But now, she paused, taking a deep breath. Now I think it's time for a change. Time to focus on what really matters. As the chapter draws to a close, we see the Harper family at a turning point. The revelations of Margaret's secret life of philanthropy and her final message have opened their eyes to a new understanding of their mother's legacy. They stand now at a crossroads, faced with the challenge of reconciling the mother they thought they knew with the complex, flawed, but ultimately well-intentioned woman she truly was. How will this new knowledge shape their future? Can they break the cycle of prioritizing wealth over connection that has defined their family for so long? As the autumn sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the room, the Harpers face their greatest challenge yet, forging a new path forward, one that honors Margaret's true legacy while healing the wounds of the past. Will they be able to transform their pain into purpose, their regret into renewal? And in doing so, can they finally become the family Margaret had always hoped they would be? The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Sarah, Michael, and Emma stood on the sprawling lawn of the Harper estate. A small group of people had gathered around them, close friends, a few longtime employees, and representatives from the charities Margaret had supported over the years. The mood was solemn yet charged with a sense of anticipation. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the assembled group. Thank you all for coming today. We've asked you here because each of you played a significant role in our mother's life, even if some of you didn't know it at the time. Michael continued, Our mother, Margaret Harper, lived a life of contradictions. To the world, she was a ruthless businesswoman. To us, she was a distant figure we struggled to understand. But in truth, she was so much more complex than any of us realized. Emma joined her uncle, her eyes bright with unshed tears. In her final days, our grandmother left us with a truth that has shaken our understanding of everything we thought we knew. And today, we want to share that truth with you and honor her in a way we believe she would have wanted. Sarah unfolded a piece of paper, Margaret's last letter to them. As she read it aloud, gasps of surprise and murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. The revelation of Margaret's secret burden, her desperate attempt to secure her children's future at the cost of her relationship with them, moved many to tears. When Sarah finished reading, Michael stepped forward again. Our mother made many mistakes, but she also did a tremendous amount of good in secret. Today, we want to bring that good into the light. One by one, representatives from various charities stood up to speak about the anonymous donations that had kept their organizations afloat. the scholarships that had changed lives, the research that had been funded. With each story, the true extent of Margaret's philanthropy became clear, painting a picture of a woman who had tried, in her own flawed way, to make the world a better place. As the last speaker finished, Emma addressed the crowd. In honor of our grandmother's true legacy, we've made a decision. The Harper fortune, which our mother worked so hard to rebuild, will be used to establish the Margaret Harper Foundation. Sarah continued, her voice strong and clear. This foundation will continue and expand the charitable work our mother began in secret. But more than that, it will stand as a testament to the idea that it's never too late to make amends, to choose love over fear, and to prioritize what truly matters in life. Michael added, we've also decided to open this house as a community center. The walls that once isolated our family will now welcome those in need of support, education, and a chance to build a better future. As the implications of their announcement sank in, a mix of emotions played across the faces in the crowd: surprise, admiration, and a growing sense of hope. Emma, her voice thick with emotion, concluded their speech. Our grandmother's last sacrifice was to reveal the truth, no matter the cost to her memory. She gave us the chance to understand her, to forgive her, and to learn from her mistakes. Now, it's our turn to honor that sacrifice by living the values she held in her heart but struggled to express in life. The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. As the formal announcement ended, people began to mingle, sharing stories of Margaret and discussing the potential impact of the new foundation. Sarah, Michael, and Emma found themselves at the center of it all, fielding questions and accepting condolences that now felt more genuine, more heartfelt than those offered at the funeral. The image of Margaret Harper was transforming before their eyes, from that of a cold, distant figure to a complex, flawed, but ultimately well-intentioned woman. As the afternoon wore on, the siblings found a quiet moment alone. They stood on the terrace, overlooking the grounds that had once felt like a gilded cage, but now held the promise of a new beginning. Sarah broke the silence, her voice soft. Do you think she'd be proud of us? Michael smiled, a sad but genuine expression. I think she would. This is what she always wanted, in a way. To secure our future, to make a difference. We're just doing it on our own terms. Emma leaned against her mother, her voice thoughtful. You know, I keep thinking about something Grandma wrote in her letter, about how true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Sarah nodded, wrapping an arm around her daughter. She was right about that. I just wish that we had known sooner. Michael finished for her. Me too. But maybe that's part of her legacy too, teaching us not to waste the time we have with the people we love. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the estate, the three of them stood in comfortable silence. The weight of the past still lingered, but it was balanced now by a sense of purpose, of hope for the future. In that moment, they could almost feel Margaret's presence, not the stern, distant figure they had known, but the woman she had longed to be. A woman who had made mistakes but had never stopped trying to make things right. A woman who, in her final act, had given her family the greatest gift of all, the truth and the chance for a new beginning. As the chapter and our story draw to a close, we're left with a sense of bittersweet resolution. The Harper family, once fractured by misunderstanding and resentment, stands united in purpose. They have chosen to transform their pain into purpose, their regret into renewal. Margaret's last sacrifice, the revelation of her long-held secret, has become the catalyst for healing and change. Her legacy, once measured in dollars and cents, will now be counted in lives touched, in relationships mended, and in a family that has found its way back to each other. As night falls on the Harper estate, we're reminded that it's never too late for understanding, for forgiveness, for love, and that sometimes the greatest inheritances are not those we can hold in our hands, but those we carry in our hearts. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button below and join our community. Based on your interests, we've picked this story for you that's showing on your screen right now. Click to watch it now. We're sure you'll love it. See you next time.